Welcome to the Sacred Thoughts Podcast. This is a safe place for us to talk about the things we don't speak of. Join me, your host, Karen Schock, as we discuss some of our deepest longings, craziest fears, and biggest questions. This life is full of joy and pain, and we are here for all of it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 4. And let me just tell you, we have had an exciting week around the Schock household. First of all, I know we mentioned it last week that Kevin and I went to Nashville for an Awaken conference, and I spoke for the first time actually in front of men. And that was the first thing I said when I got up to speak was, listen, people, I'm speaking in front of men. Normally in my speaking days, I would talk to women at women's retreats or youth groups. So I guess there were boys in there, but not men. And also, I could do children's ministry with the best of them. But to actually speak in front of the men, and I did tell them, first of all, I told them they could leave if they needed to, if they felt like it was going to be a sin to sit underneath me and listen to me speak. And number two, I promised them I wasn't going to teach them anything. I was just going to tell my story, and they didn't have to learn a thing underneath me. I was not leading them. I was just talking and telling my story. I did, however, hear from several of them afterward that I taught them a couple things. I taught them a thing or two. So it was great. We had such a blast. There were so many good speakers from all different walks of life, and also like all different in their, I guess, deconstruction. They're all in different places in that, and they're all human. It's so good to get to know them, get to hear their stories, and they were so gracious with my story. So, and we had so many things actually in common. And I think the thing we had the most in common was that none of us are flippant about what we believe. None of us have gotten to the places that we're at. And none of us feel like we've arrived anywhere by any means. But also, all of us, I think, feel like we've gone deep in our relationships with God and with people and with the Bible. And we're all on a journey, and we're just being honest about the journey. I think it's easy to have questions about God and have questions about the Bible and just pretend like you don't, and just, be kind and gracious and not talk about the things that are hard to talk about. So some of us have gone there, and it's really cool to get into a place where you're all together, and we would, we had the conference, and then we'd go out to eat afterwards, or like out for lunch and out for dinner, and met the most amazing people. I'm so grateful for the weekend. And so that happened over the weekend. And then our podcast came out. We listened to our podcast. We got to listen to it, the one that Kevin and I did together, Episode 3. We listened to that on the way home, and Kevin was like, oh my goodness, there I am. And I'm like, you did it. Like, you sounded great. He's like, I sounded like I talked too slow. And I'm like, no, you did great. So I think I will have him on again soon. Actually, we have a lot to talk about. So, and we both learned a lot, and he's just my partner in life, and I adore him, and it was great to have him on here, and he will be back soon, hopefully. So then we got back, then we turned around and went to Indy on late Tuesday night and went to a dance recital on Wednesday of our granddaughters, which, there's some good dancers, man. The whole studio is amazing. And got a phone call that our daughter-in-law was going to be induced and going into labor that night. So we drove home late on Wednesday night. And then I was texting with Drew, our son, all night long, they're going to do the epidural. They're going to do blah, blah, blah. And I loved it. Every time I got, the ding would happen. Kevin slept through it all. He's like, oh, wait, he was texting you all night? I'm like, yeah. So I felt like I was up all night. They had our sweet little baby granddaughter, Chloe Alice, named after her two, a grandma on each side, and two very strong, amazing women who have both of them have just gone to the other side in the last few years. So it's cool to have their legacies live on in our little Chloe Alice. And I cannot wait to hold her more. We were at the hospital. We got to hold her for a minute. And Mama did great. Dad did great. And we're thrilled to have another granddaughter. So, and also to have her in town. And I get to hold her and love her and squeeze her a lot. She's going to be my new little best friend. So that was exciting. And here we are, Friday morning. I still feel like, I'm still tired from all of it, but I love being here and I love talking to y'all. And today we're going to talk about my anxiety journey. I think most of the book, again, too much and not enough, a lot of this book deals with my anxiety journey, because I think had I not had anxiety ever, had I not dealt with this, I don't know, I definitely would not be the person that I am today. I think I was strolling along in life, minding my business, doing really well until age 24 when I had my first panic attack. So, and that's what we're going to talk about today. My first panic attack happened a year after Andrew was born. So we had Alyssa, got married, got pregnant right away, had Andrew, and a year almost to the date of him being born is when I had my first panic attack. Had no idea what was going on, just chest pains, right? Like, what is this? So I thought I was having a heart attack. Went to the doctor. My doctor was amazing, ran all the tests, and just kept telling me, it's not your heart, it's not your heart, it's not your heart. And I kept saying, yes, it is. I know I'm dying. Fix it. And when I finally listened to him about it not being my heart, then I was like, okay, well, I'm dying of something. So I must have some kind of cancer or something. Now, mind you, since I've been through therapy, in the last several years, we've gone over a lot of this, and my therapists have agreed that probably a lot of it came from, like I said, it was a year about to the date of after I had Andrew. And when we had Andrew, it was an emergency C-section. I write about this in the book. It was an emergency C-section. He swallowed some of the amniotic fluid. No. Sorry, some of the anesthesia. I don't know why I said that. He swallowed some of the anesthesia. And so he came out with apnea. They sent him away to another hospital an hour away for a NICU, because we didn't have a NICU in Defiance, Ohio. And I was recovering in one hospital. He was in another. Again, they told us he had a broken blood vessel on his brain or an aneurysm on his brain. Those were the two options they gave us. Nothing about swallowing anesthetic or anything. It was something wrong with his brain. So I was recovering in one hospital. Everybody was going to see Drew in the other hospital, which is where I wanted them. But the PTSD that I have from those days in the hospital, and that whole fear of also during the emergency C-section and all the things, him being in stress and them telling me to stop pushing when I still needed to push. I'd push for an hour and 45 minutes, I think. So yeah, it was kind of a mess and not a good memory. So therapists would say, okay, yeah, I think it comes from a year later, it's PTSD. And I'm like, yeah, but my child was fine. Like, why am I so upset? Like, why am I so scared? What is going on? And they're like, yeah, but you didn't know that he was going to be okay. All that fear that was inside of me, So a year later, it just all pops back up, I guess. So here we are. Also, 3 weeks before that, at Thanksgiving time, we were sitting around the kitchen table, And I learned for the first time about Reformed theology. And if you don't know about that, I had no idea. I'd never heard of it either. But that was kind of my first brush with it, where we were talking about God chooses some and doesn't choose others. And you don't have a choice in the matter. And so your children do not have a choice in the matter. Like you can't know if your kid is going to be chosen or not. You can do all the right things. A plus B doesn't always equal C. If God didn't choose them, you're out of luck and your kid is out of luck. And you know you're chosen because you said the prayer, but you don't know if your kid's chosen or not. And you don't have any control over that. Only God does. And the fact that God chooses some and doesn't choose others just scared, obviously, the crap out of me, right? So that was about 3 weeks before my first panic attack too. We just figured that out through some counseling as well in these last several years. So it could be the perfect storm. And also hormones, right? A year later, just stopping the nursing and all that kind of stuff. Hormonally, I was probably a mess too. So perfect storm, panic attack. It lasted, my anxiety, that bout of anxiety at age 24 lasted, I would say, about a good 6 months, where I was a lot of times on my mom and dad's couch, poor Kevin, working, and, we have two young kids, and he can't stay home with me, so I'm staying at my mom and dad's on their couch with my kids, and I remember laying on their couch and thinking I'm ruining my children, and just wanting to be able to get up, but also feeling like I was dying and there was no hope. I will tell you that it reared its head. I would say my anxiety reared its head in the form of health anxiety, which at the time we called hypochondria, right? I'm a hypochondriac. So any little thing that was going on in my body, I was sure I was dying. And this was in the late 1900s. So my parents, there was no internet. Like, I'm talking 1995, right? So this was pre-internet, pre-Google. We did not have Dr. Google. I had my own doctors, right? Who were telling me I was fine. Done all the blood work, done all the things. It's just anxiety. It's depression, my doctor said. And I was like, I'm not depressed. I'm just really, I can see anxiety, but not depression, as tears are rolling down my face when I'm trying to talk to him and tell him I'm dying. And my parents, at their house, in their basement, they had this big, thick book called the John Hopkins book, medical book of diseases, get this, for people over the age of 50. Now, I looked it up this morning because I was thinking it was over the age of 65, and I Googled it this morning, and it said over the age of 50, and I'm like, oh no, I thought that this was for really old people, and I'm 53, so I guess if I have the John Hopkins book now, it would pertain to me. However, at age 24, it did not pertain to me, but I found that book, and it was in their basement in this, on this bookshelf with all the books. I found that little book, and I just studied it. And I knew I was having a stroke, Alzheimer's, all the things, I guess, for old people. For now that I look at it this morning, people over the age of 50. What? Holy smokes, you guys. Anyway, I'm not going to get that book back out now that I'm over 50, right? But I looked at it, and I would sneak down there because nobody wanted me looking at that book, right? Just like they don't want you on Dr. Google. They didn't want me looking at that book, but I would sneak down there, 24 years old, and open up that book and look up my symptoms. And sure enough, again, a stroke. For sure, a stroke. Cancer of any kind. And Alzheimer's. That was a big one. So, I was a mess. And this has gone on, this health anxiety, off and on for the last 28 years. So, it comes in different forms. I could see a freckle and think it looks like it's gotten a little bigger. And oh my goodness, it's melanoma. I know I'm dying. And it's not just like, oh, I know I'm dying. It's like it gets in your brain, and then you can't look at it. You can't focus on anything else, right? So Kevin knows when I get in that. He's like zone out. Kevin gets it, and he knows it, and he sees it, and he'll be like, come back, come back. And over the years with the kids, I think too, we were trying so hard to love God and to do, have you seen the Duggars? Have you seen Shiny Happy People? We weren't part of the IBLP, which if you haven't seen Shiny Happy People, I'm asking you to watch it. For all of us who've ever been in the whole fundamental Christianity, evangelical Christianity, because IBLP, like when you think of the Duggars and 19 Kids and Counting, you think, oh, they're wearing skirts and they're doing this and they're almost Amish like or whatever. That their teachings that you see in Shiny Happy People, just know it's very triggering for anybody, for a lot of us who are in evangelicalism, to watch that, because a lot of their teachings seeped in to just regular churches and regular evangelicalism, like the spanking of your kids and the not listening to rock music or all the purity culture stuff. Been there, done that, right? Been there, taught that to my kids. And I didn't have the booklets. When I saw those booklets that they're giving the 2 and 3 year, the little children, I'm just like, oh dear God, no wonder. So lots will be answered if you ever watch that. But I was trying all that stuff. I had friends that were joining the IBLP, whatever, that homeschooled, and awesome people, sweet people, but they're like, we're going to start wearing skirts and have our daughters wear skirts. And I looked right at them and I said, I'm not doing that. My kids are still watching Disney. You can call me a homeschool misfit. And that's where it kind of started with me. I was always trying to know God and to know Jesus. And darn it, I wanted him to take away my anxiety. Why can't I just be like the Proverbs 31 woman who laughs at the days to come? And, why do I have to fear? Why do I have to have so much fear? All these verses that say don't fear. And I went through all the Bible studies. I memorized so many verses about not fearing, and I would say them all the time. I had them up in my bathroom. We would take little note cards and laminate them, and I had them all over my shower, because in the shower was a very vulnerable place for me to, think I had something going on in my body, So I tried, and I would tell people about it. I would tell older people about it in Bible studies. I would tell, just trying to get help. Somebody help me not be so afraid and not have all this fear. And I just want to tell you about a couple people, and I talk about it in the book. A couple older people, a couple of the things that people said to me, well-intentioned people. One older lady said, I was actually doing her Bible study. It was a Bible study that she actually had written, and I was doing that Bible study. And I went up to her afterwards trying to get some help. And she looked at me and she said, you're afraid to have cancer because you're vain and you don't want to lose your looks. And I was like, okay, so I'm vain. So I'm scared to death and I'm vain. So now we got to work through that. Now I've got to figure out how not to think about myself. Okay, that was one person. This was probably all in the span of about 3 years, these 3 people. Another woman, again, awesome woman of God. I wouldn't have gone to these people to go up to them after an event or whatever to talk to them if I didn't think they could help me. And they were incredible people. And I still think they're incredible people. But this lady looked at me and she said, with all your fear, you know what you're doing, right? You're flipping God off. You're giving him the bird. That's how she said it. She said, you're flipping him off. You're giving him the bird. Tough love, man. Tough love. And I walked away going, oh, Lord Jesus, I don't mean to be flipping you off. The God of the universe, please help me. Please help me. Help my unbelief. God, I believe. Help my unbelief. Like I would be in my bathroom, on my dirty bathroom floor, crying out to God. To the point of, at some points, not even knowing if I believed in him because he wasn't answering my prayer. I wanted to not fear. I wanted to be like Sarah, who trusted Abraham, calling him Lord, and didn't fear anything that was frightening. Man, I wanted to be that. And yet I had this thing in my brain that just wouldn't, this OCD, and this ADHD that, man, I wanted to keep a clean house and be the Proverbs 31 woman. And it was hard. So that was the second woman. Then there was a man. And I was sitting in a group of people. And we were all discussing all of our issues. We were being vulnerable with one another. It was late into the night. Then this very well-known, amazing man of God looked over at me. Again, at this point, I'm probably about 30. Okay. He looked over at me and he said, God could help you with that eye problem. And I looked around and I'm thinking, oh no, he can see there's something wrong with my eyes. He can, what kind of, do I have eye cancer? What is wrong with my eyes that God can help me with my eye problem? Not even joking. Those were my first thoughts. And I'm like, what's wrong with my eyes? And he said, again, in a group of people, right, that I love and respect, he said, no, God can help you with your eye problem, as in capital I. You sure do talk about yourself a lot. Oh. Okay. So now I'm selfish. And you know how many times I've asked my therapist if I'm a narcissist? Because I think about myself and I think about my body and I get scared and I'm afraid and I talk about it because I'm trying to get help. So those were the three people that spoke into my life. And as I told my therapist about this, probably about a year ago, I walked through all three of those. And again, I talk about it. I think it's called The Shame of It All. That's the poem in here in my book where I talk about it. And she was like, okay, we're going to go back to, it's shame. That's shame. There, you felt shame, and shame breeds even more fear. And I talk about it in the book, but yeah, there's so much that goes into all of that. So along my journey, I'm trying to figure it all out. Then I started to learn, okay, it's God's story. It's not my story. So if I get cancer, it's to bring glory to God. If I have a heart attack or have a stroke, it's all to bring glory to God. So, but also I'm thinking if God's going to heal me of this, he probably needs to give it to me. So that way I can bring glory into his life, into my life. The glory of God will come if I get the thing and I can honor him in it and show people that I'm good. All the thoughts, you guys, all the thoughts, always, right? So fast forward to the 2000s, and I remember, again, I think I was starting to go through like menopausal stuff, right? I'm in my 40s now at this point. And going through horrible church situations, which we talked about last week, me and Kevin, and where, the pastor looked at Kevin and said, if you could lead her right, then she wouldn't be like this. And so then I'm like blaming him for not leading me well, give me a break. And again, there's so many more stories, but the big thing was, it was a demon. Okay. So I had also, now that I think about it, gone through a bunch of those Victory Over Darkness, something, Neil T. Anderson. I'd gone through all those things where I'm trying to you had to pray through all the bad, scary movies you'd seen in your life. So I'm like, Lord, forgive me for knowing who Jason is. Oh God, forgive me for Michael and ever knowing who Michael was, and Freddy Krueger. Lord, I went to see those movies. I must have opened up a portal for Satan to come in, and all the bad songs I'd ever listened to. You had to walk through all the sexual stuff, like everything. Because if you could clear out all that, then you wouldn't have this demon of fear inside of you. So that's what people would say. I had a demon of fear inside of me. And so let's pray it out. 2 different times. The one time was way more humiliating than the other, but the one time it was missionaries that were at our church from China and like believed in the demonic and all that. So you know what? 40-year-old, 41-year-old Karen is in the middle of the room on my knees, and people have their hands on me and they're praying out the demon of fear. And guess what? I wasn't opposed to that. Like, I wanted that. Like, please let it be a demon and cast it out. And then I don't have to go through this therapy, and I don't have to memorize all these verses, and I don't have to live in this fear that I'd been living in at that point for 15 years or whatever. Yes, wouldn't that be just a quick fix if the demon would just jump out of me? Whew. But humiliating, right? Because why? Like, why me? Why do I have to have this? Why do I have to have this anxiety and depression? And, I'm supposed to be this leader. The one pastor's wife, that same pastor, his wife at one point said, you need to show your kids that you have victory over this. It's fine that you have this. And she was a therapist. It's fine that you have this anxiety, but your kids need to see you having victory. And man, talk about a failure. When you feel like a failure, at some point, okay, let me tell you this. So when it comes to the Duggars and when it comes to watching that, one thing that we learned, and that we learned all the way through, was this. I think if you saw it, you'll see the umbrella of protection. And so the umbrella of protection, it's a diagram, and it looks like the top umbrella, it's a bigger umbrella, and the top umbrella would be Christ. It says Christ on it. Okay, so there's this big umbrella, and then underneath that, there's 2 different diagrams. The diagram we learned had the pastor underneath Christ, right? So your pastor is underneath Jesus. So your pastor needs to stay under Jesus, right? Can't come out, because if you come outside of the umbrella, if you go out from under your umbrella, that's like the reign of Satan, right? So you're going to get rained on by Satan, basically. Bad things are going to happen to you. You're unsafe if you're not under the umbrella. So Christ, pastor, and then husband, and then under the husband. So the husband stays under the pastor. You got to stay under that umbrella. And then the wife stays under the husband, right? And don't go outside of what your husband wants. And then your children stay underneath the wife. So children submit to the mom and stay under her protection. So you can imagine, number one, that I think I must be outside. If I have a demon inside of me, or I can't get over this, I must be outside of the protection of my husband. And then what about my kids? So I spent my life, once I learned that, which was, again, I think I learned that one in the 1900s, maybe early 2000s, the umbrella thing, spending my life trying to stay under my husband. And not only trying to stay under my husband, but keep my kids under me, And that's where, when you see them talking about spanking their kids and how they did it and learning it, and Michael Pearl is up on stage teaching how to spank your kids. We read those books because if we were going to spank our kids, we were going to do it the biblical way. Okay, please don't hate me for that. I have apologized to my children, our children. Kevin and I have both apologized to them and said, we are sorry for any of that, because the pain that may have caused you. And if you need to go see therapy, we're good with that. We have apologized for several things, but that's a main one. We learned that you use a wooden spoon, you don't use your hand, because you don't want your kids to associate your hand with spanking, and you don't want. And if you have to go get a wooden spoon, that gives you time to cool off. You can't just wail off and hit them. So we thought this was so biblical. You take them to a room, you tell them, you pray with them. I had one mentor friend tell me, I just would tell my kids, go pick your weapon. And so Lord have mercy. For real, have mercy. So a year or so ago, I got rid of all of our wooden spoons because, and I told our kids, I'm like, you know what? We don't have any wooden spoons anymore in these drawers. So you don't have to think about that. And they're like, Mom, give me a break. And then I realized, you know what? It was tougher on me even because they barely remember it. They were little, right? Like, mind you, I know that there are children that really do remember it and are scarred. My children would say they're not. But we're early on in this, right? They could still come back later and say that they are. And I'm good with that. I will wear it. I wear a lot. I will wear that one, right? And I took all the wooden spoons out, but I realized it was for me because every time I see a wooden spoon, I'm tortured by it. You know, I hate it. I hate to think that we did that. My parents never spanked me. It might have just been because I was the youngest. I'm not sure if my siblings could say the same for them. But, you know, I was the baby of the family and I guess spoiled rotten, whatever. And Kevin would say he never got spanked. So, and we turned out okay. Oh, but we did have sex before we were married. So maybe if you spank them enough, they won't do that. Except for, I think that they end up doing that, right? Anyway, yeah, there are other ways to do that. I want to check my time right now. Okay, so back to having anxiety. Can you see, maybe even just talking about all of that, you could see where like I was so confused. None of that felt right. None of it. My daughter brought up the other day, or a couple months ago, we were talking and she just brought up, she's like, I just think about my little self and how I was just, you know, I had so much sugar. You gave me so much sugar. And I'm like, you're right. We did. We didn't know. Like, I remember going on a diet before we got married and it was like a low fat diet. So bring on the sugar and don't worry, you know, just take out the fat. And we just didn't know. I think a lot of people probably did know, but in my world, I didn't know not to give them, you know, Fruity Pebbles and Lucky Charms and pop maybe in a bottle. Oops. But my doctor told me to do that, by the way. My pediatrician told me to do that. Forget the Pedialyte. That's expensive. Just go ahead and put some pop in the bottle when they have diarrhea. So anyway, Confessions 101, maybe that's what we'll call this podcast instead of anything about anxiety. So you could see why though. And what I said back to her was, I am so sorry. I did not know better. Like that sounds like I'm so sorry, but I don't think I ever had a check in my spirit about that one, about the sugar thing. I would now, and I do now when I give my grandkids sugar, but I didn't then, but I did have a check in my spirit about the spanking. I did feel like it was wrong. So I am sorry about that. All of this, trying to be the perfect wife and the perfect Proverbs 31 woman and trying to teach our kids the perfect way to live and keep them under the umbrella. I was reading a book and I have it here. So if you're watching this on YouTube, which, by the way, this comes out on Mondays on podcast, so on Apple and Spotify and all that. And then on Tuesdays, we upload the YouTube video so you can actually see us. Okay, so you can watch it on podcast and you can watch it on YouTube, just so you know that. On Tuesdays, it comes out on YouTube. Watch it on both, right? Listen to it, then you can watch it. But this book right here, I started reading a few weeks ago. I found him. His name is Kyle Cease. He's been in movies and he's a former comedian. Now, kind of, what do you call it? A motivational, maybe, speaker. He has a lot on Instagram. And every time he's on Instagram and does his videos, I just love them. But this book is called The Illusion of Money. And I heard him on a podcast. I think a Jay Shetty podcast, maybe. And I was so impressed that I bought his book right away. And one of the things that he talks about in this book, The Illusion of Money, and I underlined it, and I should have put it in. I'm just going to tell you what it says. Okay. He talks about fear, and he talks about how we have these great imaginations, right? Everyone has a genius imagination. And what happens with our imagination is we imagine things going wrong, right? And we fear things. And so when we use our imagination to fear something, then our imagination ends up, all of our imagination energy, all of that energy to create anything gets used to stop whatever this bad thing that we've got in our imagination that's going to happen. We use all of our creative energy to fight something that we don't even know that that's ever going to happen, but we're so afraid that that's where our creative energy goes, right? And that, I would say, is the story of my life. Again, I just read this in the last couple of months, and I'm like, yes, that's the story of my life. I fear something, something happens, I fear it, and then all of my energy, all of my imagination, I zone out and I go toward, okay, that can't happen. We can't have that happen. So think about the umbrella. Think about me being under that umbrella, right? I don't want to be unsubmissive to my husband, and I certainly don't want my husband to be unsubmissive to the pastor. And God forbid my kids be unsubmissive to me. So I have to keep it all together, and I can imagine that they are doing things, and I'm learning, fear is being driven into us about everything. Fear the government, fear the rapture stuff, fear hell for your children, fear the LGBTQ, whatever. Fear it, fear. Okay, we've got to work. So all my creative energy goes into, got to keep my kids in line, got to keep myself in line, got to keep, no creative energy is getting to be used to love people, to love life, to enjoy life, to get out and do fun things. I spent so much of my time in agony trying to keep the fear out and trying to keep the fear away. And when I read that, I'm like, so that has helped me even just in these last few months. And as the book comes out and, as I'm doing these podcasts and I can go so far and so deep into all the possible things that could go wrong. And when I start to go that way, I go, okay, wait, is that where I want my creative energy to go right now? Into things that I don't even know are possible or that I don't even know are going to happen for sure? And it's just helpful, like, okay, take a deep breath. Let's do some meditation. Let's try to use our imagination for some good. Let's try to think of some good things. Let's look at this day with an imagination toward the good, and I think the Bible is pretty clear. Okay, I shouldn't say that, because is the Bible clear about anything, really? But God is love, and perfect love drives out fear, right? What drives out fear? Love drives out fear. Does fear drive out fear? No. And that's what was being used. That's what I was using on myself. That's what I was using on my children. That's what I was trying to drive out things with fear. The fear of God. I'll put the fear of God in them. How about the love of God? How about if I love people? How about focusing on the love that God has for me and for everyone? And let that drive out the fear. It's his kindness that leads us to repentance. So, and let me look at the time. Yep, it's time. It's time for me to stop here. I was going to read from my book, but I'm not going to, because you know what? You can get the book and read it. My book, it's in the show notes. We put it in the show notes, so if you want to get it there. And so you'll get this podcast on Monday. I think on Tuesday night, I'm going to be interviewed again on Fireside Creators. And this time it's going to be a panel talking about the Duggars, talking about shiny, happy people. I cannot emphasize enough. I know even if you're like, I don't want to see that. If it scares you, then you should be the one watching it. You should actually watch it and let it sink in, and then figure out ways to not run from everything, but to run towards things with love and in love. Yeah? Okay, you guys. I want you to have a good week, and we'll be back here next week. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, what we're going to do. I've got my grandbabies coming in for the week, which I'm excited about. And I got a new grandbaby to hold, which I'm really excited about. So, love you all. Have a wonderful week. See you next time. I want to thank our production company, Coraggio Media, and the WELT 95.7 studios in beautiful downtown Fort Wayne. Please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And find us on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button and make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Also, you can find us on Facebook, where we will be free to discuss all of our sacred thoughts. To share your stories, please email me at the link below. As always, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week when we will talk more about our deepest longings, craziest fears, and biggest questions.